Delivering Miracles is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families like yours and mine. Download the free network app on any Apple and Android devices and listen to your favorite episodes on the go. Okay, real talk for a second. Plastic is bad for your fertility. I know that sounds super obvious, and you probably have heard this a million times before, but I am shocked at how much research has been coming out recently about how BPA and non-BPA plastics affect things like embryo implantation, the number of eggs retrieved during an IVF cycle, recurrent miscarriages, PCOS, and how it alters DNA in eggs and sperm. It's time to say goodbye to plastic, and I am so thankful to my friends over at Mighty Nest who have made this their mission to help families like yours and mine make this shift as easily and as affordably as possible. I'm totally obsessed with my items from Mighty Nest, and I know you're going to love them too. So head over to parijatdeshpande.com/Mighty Nest to learn how you can easily and affordably replace plastics with environmentally and reproductively friendly items instead. And for all Delivering Miracles listeners, Mighty Nest is offering $5 off and free shipping for your first order of their monthly subscription box, the Mighty Fix. You are going to love it. Head over to parijatdeshpande.com/Mighty Nest to get shopping now. This episode is a rebroadcast of a Delivering Miracles episode that is a listener favorite. Can't wait for you to enjoy this one again. Welcome to Delivering Miracles, a podcast to teach women like you tips and strategies on how you can have a safer pregnancy so you can bring home a healthy baby. I'm your host and your high-risk pregnancy expert, Parijat Deshpande. I can't wait to chat with you. I was on bed rest for many, many months. And if you've been following my story and you know a little bit about it, you know that it started very early in my pregnancy. And what that meant was I became best friends with my laptop because that was my only source of connection to the world. I wasn't allowed to work anymore. I wasn't going out anymore. And for somebody who's extroverted and social and loves to be around people, it was pure torture. So my laptop was my savior. And, I'll admit, I have admitted before, I'll admit again, a lot of that time was spent researching on Google for things that I never should have done to some extent. It did get a little out of hand. Some of it was helpful because I was able to bring in some data to my doctors to talk about and on how it impacts me. And that's all good and stuff. But some of it was just social, scrolling on Facebook or, reading articles that are on celebrities or recipes and different things like that. Because that was all I had. That was all I had. And at some point watching movies on Netflix got really, really old. So I remember this day, I already had 2 complications. And I was barely in at the end of my first trimester. So things were falling apart really early. And I was exhausted. I was burned out. I was like, oh my gosh, this pregnancy is so difficult already. I was already seeing my doctor so much. I was really scared. I was nervous about losing the baby. There's all of that. And I thought, okay, well, at least I'm doing everything I can by following my doctor's recommendations and limiting my activity. And I've made these sacrifices with my career because I want to make sure I'm doing the best for my baby. And then I look online, just scrolling, this time just for social fun stuff. And I see this article about how there are certain types of body soaps that you should not use because they have really detrimental impact on the growing fetus. And I remember this day like it was yesterday. I was sitting on the sofa. I was wearing this huge red shirt. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I thought I was doing everything right. I was eating well or as well as I could. I was following my doctor's recommendations. I was taking it easy. I was staying hydrated. I was taking all my vitamins. And now we have to talk about soap? and what that is doing to hurt my baby. And this article, I don't even remember. I was trying to look for it to read from it for this episode, but I couldn't find it. But it was a very, it was an article that really was written very strongly to make me feel like, oh my God, I'm completely hurting this child and I'm a terrible person for using this particular brand of soap, or really any kind of soap ever, any kind of, just putting anything on my body. It was a not greatly written article. So I had this moment of huge freak out where I'm like, oh my gosh, what else is there in my house that's like damaging my pregnancy and making this even worse? And it was just this moment of freak out. And of course, I'm sitting there alone. So there's nobody to calm me down and tell me, okay, hey, chill out, get some perspective here. It's okay. And when I step back and think about it, like, okay, it makes sense. Our skin is our largest organ in our body. It would make sense that what we put on it is as important as what we put in our bodies. You know, there's so much talk about nutrition and eating healthy and all the vitamins and minerals that you get. So, I mean, I get it. I get the point. But I was like, holy, what? Now there's this whole other thing I have to think about? And why didn't anyone tell me beforehand? So I get it. I mean, there's a lot of these messages around everywhere, and especially when you're trying to get pregnant, right? I was already pregnant at that time. I can't imagine what I would have felt like had I read this ahead of time. But for those of you that are listening and who are trying to get pregnant, there's so much information out there about what to eat, what not to eat, what to smell, what not to smell, what to put on your body, what not to put on your body. And there is some truth to that. There is some truth to that, but it's really overwhelming. And I don't want you to get caught up in the madness of it all like I did in that moment. Thank goodness I wasn't allowed to get up. Otherwise, I probably would have thrown everything out of my house. But I don't want that to happen to you. So I'm really, really happy to have Dr. Lora Shahine back on Delivering Miracles to talk about toxins and which ones we need to actually pay attention to and which ones we can actually do something about, and how to get out of that moment of panic that I was in so that you can improve your chances of getting pregnant. Dr. Lora Shahine is awesome, by the way. She completed her residency in OBGYN at the University of California in San Francisco and fellowship in reproductive endocrinology at Stanford University. She is currently the director of the recurrent pregnancy program or pregnancy loss program at Pacific Northwest Fertility and clinical faculty at the University of Washington in Seattle. She's an author of both clinical research trials, multiple blogs, and 2 books, Planting the Seeds of Pregnancy, an Integrative Approach to Fertility Care, and Not Broken, an Approachable Guide to Miscarriage and Recurrent Pregnancy Loss, which we actually talked about in a previous episode, which I'll link to in the show notes. So I am really, really excited to have this conversation with you. Welcome, Dr. Shahine. I'm so glad that you're back.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor.
Yes. This is going to be such a great conversation because there is so much of this out there, and there's so many women like me who are reading this stuff going, oh my God, now what? Now what do I have to clean out? So before we get into those details, though, I got to be honest. I don't hear from a lot of reproductive endocrinologists about environmental or lifestyle factors that impact fertility. And it's really a breath of fresh air to hear someone like you who's classically trained talk about this. So how did you get interested in that connection between environmental toxins and fertility?
Sure. That's a great question. I can remember the first time the topic was ever introduced to me. It was during my fellowship at Stanford, and there was an internal conference for people who were at Stanford, physicians, scientists, kind of coming together and sharing their current research. And it was a really sort of collegial, sort of nice sharing of the minds. And this was about 2007, maybe 2008. And I remember there was a scientist who presented information on the impact of BPA, which is a chemical found in a lot of plastics and household products, and its effect on mouse reproduction and increased miscarriage and egg production and quality. And that was the first time it was introduced. And I sort of thought to myself, okay, I'm going to think about plastics, but then it just sort of very quickly went out of my mind. And then I kept seeing things as I was researching my books and writing about an integrative approach to fertility. A lot of Eastern medicine providers are really talking about this and thinking about it. So I learned a lot that way. And then definitely in writing my miscarriage book. So learning through observation and research.
That is so interesting. And I love the fact that you were so open to considering that, because I think at least from my impression, it's something that can be very easily tossed aside. Oh, well, it's not causal, so maybe it's not a big deal and it really doesn't impact fertility that much. And I love that you've become so passionate about it to really raise awareness for so many couples, because I think it gives couples a little bit of control back, that there are things they can do while they're working with their doctors to help them get pregnant, which I think is really, really important.
That's a great point. And I'm really thinking about how to get this message out to people in a way that's really positive. Because when I really started learning about it and researching it, I really went to a dark place. Like, there is so much evidence out there, and it's in the basic science research, and it's in the medical journals, and it's in some legislation, but the message is really not out there, but it's overwhelming how much evidence there is. And so I want to get the message out in a positive way. And just like you said, everybody asks before they start treatment or when they come to me, like, is there anything else that I can do? Is there anything like, what supplements can I take? What diet should I have? And so it's something to bring up in a positive way, that somebody can, just through awareness, make small changes that make a big difference in their overall health.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm all about that. That is all my practice is about when I work with clients too, is what can you do? The little things you can do to get back in control, to help yourself improve your health, which is so, so important on so many levels. So I love this. So let's get a little bit more specific here. Are there particular toxins that impact male fertility versus female fertility differently?
Not that I'm aware of. When people look at toxins, they usually look at both, or they're focusing on one or the other. So you can look at it in, if you wanted to ask questions about what affects, female fertility, you can look at it that way if you're researching, or you can look at male fertility, or you can look at up by toxin. But for example, we've already brought up BPA, and that can impact both female and male fertility. A lot of research looks at pesticides, and they'll look at, when the research is ongoing, they're really looking at one or the other, but usually the, data comes along kind of at the same time. And sometimes it's easier to look at male impact, just because it's so easy to look at sperm outside of the body.
Right.
And so sometimes evidence will kind of come up through the male reproductive research first, and then people will find ways to look at it as far as eggs are concerned. It's just more difficult to look at that. Just like in humans, it's really hard to get evidence and research into the effects of things on human eggs.
Right. Yes. For so many reasons, there's so many hurdles to get through to actually be able to do those tests. And then how about in terms of, and before we get into these specific toxins, does it impact, or are the toxins different in how they impact you depending on the health issue that the person's facing? For example, are there certain toxins that make endometriosis worse versus making PCOS worse versus making sperm motility worse? Like, does it matter based on what you're dealing with biologically?
That's a great question. And everybody is looking at this in different ways. So just to kind of start off really big and sort of look at a really high level, people have this feeling that pesticides, chemicals, are affecting our overall health. And they're finding different ways to answer that question. do pesticides affect our fertility? Well, how are we going to look at that? And there's two broad types of studies. Some studies are just looking at association, like when there's a chemical accident, for example, a very large exposure to some sort of chemical and humans are affected, it's by accident, then you can look at sort of a fallout for that and sort of follow people's health over time. And then those are sort of looking at associations. Then when you see those associations, you're sort of saying like, okay, when people were exposed to this really high endocrine disruptor, when a factory exploded in northern Italy in the 1970s, there was immediate fallout in that, livestock died, people had skin impact and breathing difficulties, and no humans died from that explosion, but their health has been followed, over the decades and looking at increased risk of obesity and increased risk of diabetes and decreased fertility and increased certain cancers, right? So you sort of see this association, and then go to the scientists then go into usually animal models because it's easier to study, and they'll expose animals to certain high levels of chemicals and sort of watch outcomes. So to answer just a couple of your questions, there's an interesting study that's going on right now in Eastern Washington, in the United States, looking at the exposure of women who have endometriosis to phthalates. So phthalates are a chemical that's in a lot of products that we use, especially think about it in beauty products, like shampoos and
yes.
And what they did, it's interesting, they found women who had surgically diagnosed endometriosis, which is the classical way to diagnose it, and then started following them over time and did questionnaires and sort of found that these women, and then studied their phthalate levels in their blood and urine and found that there is an association with a high level of phthalates in endometriosis. So that's an interesting study. Wow. It's sort of a pilot study, like, okay, we saw this once, we saw it in this group of women, and then now we need to go and investigate it further. So, there's lots of studies looking at different things, and there's lots of different ways of answering it, but there's enough to sort of pay attention.
Right, absolutely. So let's get into some of those things. What are some of the most common toxins that men and women should be aware of that we don't even realize are in our environment so frequently, but have been shown to impact fertility?
Sure. I kind of think of the big three, sort of pesticides, BPA, and phthalates. And a great, interesting thing about pesticides are DDT is something that we think about. It was developed in the late 1800s. And, in World War I, World War II, chemicals were amazing, right? DDT eliminated malaria in the United States.
Right. Yes.
And it allowed for food production to be significantly less expensive. So there's all these wonderful things that sort of happened from pesticides. But in the 1950s and 1960s, people started seeing impacts on animal species, and certain bird populations were dropping off, and certain smaller animals were having reproductive issues, and fish, et cetera. And so, by the 1970s, DDT was eliminated, outlawed in the United States and in most first world countries because they were seeing impacts on humans' fertility as well. But it's still used and produced and used in food in other parts of the world. So there are other pesticides that are still being used. They aren't as studied as well, but it's just a great example of how there's a huge impact, but it took us decades to kind of figure it out. And so if you're thinking about your food and intake, do the best you can, but try to eat organic, try to eat local. If you think about not getting as much imported fruit as you could, right? And then just washing your fruits and vegetables as much as you can to try to get that burden off. That's something that you can do.
What about for some of our listeners who can't afford to eat organic because it is so expensive?
Absolutely.
How bad is this? Is this something they should be really worried about?
Well, there is great evidence that just washing food can be really beneficial. Or there's great lists online that kind of talk about which foods are more susceptible to pesticides than others. So, for example, you might want to eat less strawberries, but maybe more bananas because they're a little bit more protected.
Yes.
And you really need to have a varied diet. And so you don't want to just eat the same thing over and over, but you could educate yourself a little bit about, changing maybe proportions of certain fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, there's a list that comes out every year, right? Of like the dirty dozen or something that are the most impacted that they believe for that particular season.
Right.
That you should try to avoid versus ones that if you wash, it's probably fine versus ones that really haven't shown to have a lot of high levels of toxins in them that year, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful.
Okay.
And then another one that we talk about is BPA. So that's bisphenol A, and it's a plasticizer. There's an interesting story around that. It was actually first developed, again, in the late 1800s to be used as a synthetic estrogen. So it was developed in the pharmaceutical industry.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, it was first used as a medication.
That is so interesting. Yeah. I had no idea.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is it was replaced by another synthetic estrogen called DES. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I've heard of that one. Mm-hmm.
It's no longer available for use as a pharmaceutical. DES was banned in 1972 when a New England Journal article came out and showed that when people used DES during pregnancy, because it was used as a way to decrease the risk of miscarriage and decrease preterm deliveries because it's an estrogen, daughters that were born from women who got high levels of this in pregnancy had a higher risk of vaginal cancer and uterine malformations, which led to their fertility issues.
Right. And a lot of that's coming up now because those women are trying to get pregnant now in the last decade or so, or 15 years or so, and they're starting to see a huge connection between them and their mothers who use this, right?
Right. So this is a great example of an endocrine disruptor, and you're seeing transgenerational effects from use of an endocrine disruptor in previous generations.
I mean, I have goosebumps hearing that there's such a powerful impact of this when it crosses generations like that. It's amazing.
Yeah. And so if you think about it, DES was used to replace BPA. And so BPA was shelved because it wasn't as strong of an endocrine disruptor. It wasn't as strong of a estrogen mimicker. And then it came back out into use in the industrial use because they found out it was a great way to stabilize plastics. So it's not used as a medication anymore, but it's used in a lot of plastic materials, especially food containers. It's in a lot of linings of canned food, water bottles. It's in just a lot of things that we're exposed to every day.
Yes. I remember there was a huge push for this a little while ago, maybe about 10 years ago or so, where people were like, oh my gosh, it's in our water bottles. Stop with the Nalgene's. And everyone switched over to stainless steel for a little while. And now there's a push to say, no, we need glass containers. So everyone's moving to glass containers. How reliable is this? I mean, how bad is this?
Sure. Well, there's a significant amount of evidence showing that BPA is affecting reproduction, it's affecting sperm function, sperm counts, egg quality, success with IVF treatments, miscarriage rates. The studies, kind of like the ones that I've mentioned before, they're, pilot studies, they're showing associations, but in animal studies, they really are showing causation, that if there's a dose response, so the higher exposure of BPA in mice shows higher miscarriage rate and lower egg quality and more embryos that have issues. It's overwhelming. And, there is legislation about this, and it's, Canada and Europe is sort of far ahead of the United States. Even California is ahead of the FDA. California banned BPA use in baby bottles in 2008. And that was the same year that the FDA came out and said it's fine in low doses. But they did come out a few years later and say, okay, maybe it shouldn't be in baby bottles.
Actually not. Right.
Just like DDT, just like DES, we're just, at some point we're going to have more evidence and the message will get out there. But until then, I think it's just important to just be aware and kind of think about ways to decrease your exposure in your own house.
Right. So we're talking plastics, which I think is quite well known, but you also mentioned canned goods have BPA as well.
Right. It's in the plastic liner of a lot of canned goods. So it's exposed to a lot of the food and canned goods as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So
of course, you're going to have canned food every once in a while, but if you can try to eat more fresh or even frozen, I'm sure that there's issues with frozen food too, but at least it would decrease your exposure to the lining of canned food.
Right. So decrease the amount of exposure through canned foods, obviously look through plastics, and switch to glass, would you say? Glass containers are probably best?
The basic thing that I think of is I just try to not mix food, plastic, and heat. Because when you heat up the plastic, it's going to seep into the food. So, you have a microwave dinner. That's okay. You get takeout. Okay. Like it's in the plastic. But as soon as you get it, or before you start heating something up in the microwave, just take it out and put it in a glass container before you heat it up.
That seems simple enough to do.
Yeah. Like think about your leftovers containers, right? So, leftovers are great. It's decreasing waste, but maybe you switch your containers to glass containers as opposed to plastic. And then when you grab them out of the fridge and you're heating them up in your microwave, they're already in glass. You don't have to change it.
Right. Okay. That sounds totally reasonable. Totally easy to do. So we talked about pesticides and washing your food, at the very least, washing your food really well, if not eating local and organic. We talked about BPA, which is in plastics, which is in canned goods, and reducing your exposure to that. And the last thing that you talked about was phthalates. Where do we find those and what are those?
Sure. Phthalates are also sort of plasticizers, and they're something that it's a chemical that stabilizes products. It's one of the ways that we have a lot of products on the market that have a really long shelf life because they don't break down a lot. And it is in things like makeup, beauty products, washing washing detergent. It's in a lot, and it's unfortunately it's not really regulated. It's hard to figure out if your products have it or not. There's really very little oversight by the FDA as far as beauty products are concerned. And sometimes if you just look on the back of your bottle and it says the word fragrance, that's often a way to hide that it's phthalates, and they're often used in a lot of fragrance.
Oh, man, that is good to know, because everything has fragrance in it.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of us are very sensitive to it. I know my skin is very sensitive, so I tend to get things that have no fragrance in them, but I had no idea that it meant more than just something that smells nice.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are, the beauty industry is really not regulated. A fact that I write in a couple of my books is, the last year that there was a law passed to limit any sort of chemical that went in a beauty product in the United States was in 1938. The United States has banned 11 chemicals from products, but in Europe, they've banned over 1,300.
Oh my gosh. Why are we so behind on this?
I don't know from personal experience, but I would imagine that, I think that there's a significant amount of lobbying and, a lot of people that want to keep the cost of production down and keep products inexpensive. You can kind of do the math or kind of read between the lines. But a lot of people that don't want us to know, assume best intentions. Maybe they aren't aware of things, but it is something that you can be aware of yourself.
Right. And I think this is in line with that article that I'd read when I was pregnant about something about body soap or, something in, I think, shampoo or soap, I believe it was, that said, oh my gosh, there's all these chemicals in there that could hurt the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing you saying is, well, yeah, they're kind of in a lot of different things. So what can we use that is safe if it seems like it's in almost everything?
Right. There are a lot of online helpful websites. And I think one of the best is called ewg.org. It's environmentalworkinggroup.org. And they have done a lot to increase awareness for what's in our products. And it's a wealth of information, a lot of articles, ways to identify products. They even have an app that you can download to your smartphone, and you can take your phone into the drugstore and use the barcode, and it will tell you, like, on its level how safe they think the product is.
Oh, that is so neat. I am going to link this in the show notes, and I'm totally going to download that app as soon as we are done, because this is awesome.
It's great. I think the one thing that you'll see in reviews in the app are that it doesn't have every product, and that's kind of the way it is. But I think just having that information and learning a little bit more can be helpful. There are a lot of websites out there and other people who have done the work for you and kind of cultivated what they think are non-toxic products and, beneficial products. Like, there's a whole company, Beauty Counter, that I can't attest to every
I've heard of
product
them
that they have, but their whole mission is to have non-toxic or low toxic beauty products. And they also are doing a lot to lobby Congress for increasing awareness and decreasing some of the chemicals that are in products. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So we've talked about 3: BPA, pesticides, and phthalates. But what about one that I know a lot of our listeners are thinking about, which is technology?
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact fertility? You hear a lot about, don't put your laptop on your lap if you're a man and you're trying to get pregnant, or don't put your cell phone in your pocket. Is there any truth to this?
No, I really don't know. I have absolutely seen the social media buzz and the worry about that, but I haven't researched the actual data myself. And so, it's something that I'm curious about, but I just don't know yet.
Okay. Is it safe to say that maybe there's a connection, or do you feel like it's probably gone too far and it's, because we've got I think they have men's underwear that's supposed to help them keep cool if you have laptops on your lap frequently or something.
Yeah.
Does it feel like it's gone a little too far?
My gut is that's a little too far. But I'm always open to learning, and we'll see.
Right. That's true. And I guess tech is very relatively new. I mean, it's grown very quickly in a very short amount of time. So I guess, like you were saying about all these other studies, over time, we're probably going to be able to tell and see what connection there might be.
Yeah, I did see an article recently about a middle school that did a project with Wi-Fi, and they had plants that they were growing, and some of the plants were grown right next to the Wi-Fi device.
And, I heard about this, yes.
And the other plants weren't. And the plants that were grown near Wi-Fi actually did not grow as well. And, so I thought that was very interesting, but I sort of thought to myself, okay, I want to research this a little bit more. But the point of the story is that these middle school girls are no longer sleeping with their phones in their room. And I thought, well, that's a good outcome.
That's a great outcome, no matter what the reason is. Absolutely. Okay, so I got to be honest. We talked about moving away from plastics, washing your veggies, eating organic, all the beauty products have all the things. And that sounds really overwhelming. Like, should I burn down my house and bathe with lemon juice? And, how does this translate to real life? Because this is scary.
Oh, I know. And that's exactly how I felt a couple years ago when I started researching it. I kind of mentally shut down a little bit because it was too much. I got overwhelmed. I really did. And then I just sort of took a deep breath and I sort of said, it's okay. And one thing that I did was every time that I was planning to buy a product, like when a shampoo ran out or my laundry detergent ran out, I thought about replacing it. And I thought about what I might be able to replace it with that would be less toxic. And that was really helpful to me because it wasn't all at once and it wasn't overwhelming. It was one thing at a time.
That's a really great idea. Because I know I have this tendency to just be like, get rid of it all. And I could see myself wanting to just throw out my entire closet and start over. But that's also a huge waste of money and really impractical.
Exactly.
So I really like this idea that, okay, at some point it's going to run out. So just use it for the next, whatever, week, 2 weeks, month, because you've already been using it. And then the next time, replace it with something else now that you have a little more information about what you could and should be looking for.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Is there anything, I guess, for our listeners, maybe they're not sure where to begin? I know that's how I would feel. And, there's so many different options. Should I start with laundry detergent? Should I start with food? Should I start, if you could recommend one thing that couples who are trying to conceive should consider removing from their environment to improve their fertility, what would that one thing be? Where should they start?
I think something really simple is to replace the water bottle and really think about glass or stainless steel. I think that is one thing. If you're trying to stay hydrated, you're drinking water throughout the day, that is one thing that would impact immediately. And I will say that something very hopeful. There's plenty of studies that show that if you do make small changes, you can dramatically decrease the level of BPA, phthalates, and pesticides in your.
Yes.
So just one.
That is the really cool thing about this, right? In our bodies, that it doesn't take a lot to have a huge positive impact.
Exactly. So that I want to leave people with something hopeful.
Yes, absolutely. So water bottles. Okay, for those of you that are listening and who want to do something now, I'm looking at my water bottle right now going, oh, that's not glass. I should probably go get a new one. There's a good place to start. I think all of us are going to end this episode and go run to Target and grab a glass bottle right after this.
That's great.
So for all of you that are listening, if you're trying to get pregnant, whether it's taking longer than you expected or you're just starting out right now, look at your environment and see what you can improve. What's around you that you breathe in, that you put in your body? And what is it that you can improve on? Because what you put on your body is just as important as what you put in your body with food. And there's so much you can do to improve that really, really dramatically. Dr. Shahine, this was amazing. And I would love to know, what are your final words of hope for women and couples who are trying to get pregnant and want to do everything that they can to help themselves get pregnant as quickly as possible?
Absolutely. One thing that I say a lot is, well, two things: everything in moderation, even moderation. So,
oh my gosh, I love that.
It takes over your whole life, and you can't stop living because you're trying to have your baby. So all these things that you're doing, all this information that you're giving, just everything in moderation. And the second thing is 80% is perfection. Perfection is 80%. So if you are feeling like you're decreasing your toxin exposure 80% of the time, that's perfection. Or you're eating well 80% of the time, that's perfection. We cannot all be perfect all of the time, and just do your best.
I love this. It's totally a message I needed to hear today. And I know for all of our listeners, it is something that is so, so helpful to hear and be reminded of. We don't have to do this 100% of the time perfectly. And that 80% is enough. I love that. Thank you so much. Dr. Shahine, where can people find you if they want to know more about toxins and fertility or just want to talk to you further about this topic?
I do have a website. It's lorashahine.com. And I have written a couple of blog posts on ways to decrease toxin exposure to help with reproduction. That should be helpful. And then always happy to connect with people on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's at Dr. Lora Shahine.
Fantastic. We'll have all of that linked for you all in the show notes, so it's very easy to find her. Thank you. Thank you so much for today. This has been amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I remember that day like it was literally yesterday going, oh my gosh, I am doing this to myself. And then you start reading and researching and hearing all these things. And let's be honest, Facebook does not help with the crazy stories that you hear about how plastic did this or that, or how shampoos did this or that to babies. And it is so nice to hear that it's doable, that it's possible, and a really great reminder that even the smallest of changes can make a huge, huge impact on your health. And that's true if you're trying to have a baby or not, but especially if you're trying to have a baby, this is such a great reminder. A little bit goes a very long way. I feel so relieved. I hope you all do too. So if you are trying to get pregnant, okay, and especially if it's taking you longer than you expected, but if you're trying or you're just starting, look at your environment and see what you can improve. What's around you? What do you breathe in? What are you putting on your body? Because that's just as important as helping you get pregnant as what you put in your body with food. So take a look around and see what you can improve, because a little bit really does go a long way. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I would love it if you can head over to iTunes and leave a review so more women and couples who are going through infertility or trying to get pregnant can learn about all these different things that we need to talk about more that are going to help you get pregnant as quickly as possible. And if you want additional support to help yourself get pregnant because you know you are really stressed out, your anxiety is really high, you're feeling really overwhelmed, head over to parijatdeshpande.com/fertility to learn about how releasing physical and emotional stress from your body is critical to preparing your body for pregnancy. And you can learn how I can help you do that. Also, I would love to stay in touch, so follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Parijat Desh. That's PARIJATDESH. Come on over and say hi. I would love to hear from you. It's a crazy time with technology, with so much information at our fingertips. It can be really overwhelming. And it's so nice to know that there are still little things that we can do every single day that can make a huge impact on how quickly we get pregnant, how healthy our pregnancy is, and just how healthy our family is too. It doesn't take a lot. And there are things that we can do every single day, like running to Target and grabbing a glass water bottle. Take it one day, one step at a time. You can do this.